And welcome to the Prescribing Prosperity Podcast with your hosts, John and Alex Soutsos. Gentlemen, good to be with you again.
Hey, Bill, always good to see you.
It's great to see you. So today, gentlemen, we're going to get into an interesting topic, the 10 biggest financial mistakes that keep people from accumulating wealth. And I'm surprised it's 10. I mean, usually I think people spend more than they make, but I bet it's more complicated than that, guys. Who wants to take the floor on this one?
Well, Bill, it definitely starts with that. That's one of the key components, but I don't think we need to explain that one to too many people, or maybe we do. Because certain governments don't seem to understand that, but that's a different discussion.
I don't know any governments that understand that, to be honest with you.
What do you mean we can't spend more than we bring in?
That's exactly right.
Anyway, yeah. So the purpose behind today's episode, Bill, is just to try and provide people with some topical guidance on things that we see in our experience working in the financial services sector. Some of these are just mistakes that people make. Some of them also come with common myths that are associated with their money. So we'll start with the first one, and people will start to get an idea as we go through. So one of the first issues that we see a lot of the time, especially in the medical community, is people confuse income with wealth.
How do you mean?
What I mean by that is, people earn a large amount of money.
Okay.
And kind of going back to your very first point, it's great that you earn a large portion of money, but if for every dollar you bring in, the equal amount of dollars are going out on current consumption items, then you are not wealthy.
No.
You are a spendthrift. You are able to enjoy a lot of current consumables or experiences.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, your ability to accumulate something of lasting, growing wealth is limited. So let's separate. I hear people saying a lot of times, and I know this is a particular pet peeve of my dad's. People say, "Oh, I'm investing in X." You're investing in the consumption of X. So, for example, to say, I'm investing in a pair of sneakers. Well, sneakers are not going to provide you with a rate of return. They're not going to grow in value over the long term, unless you're buying one of those limited edition Nike. But that's not what we're referring to, generally speaking. Here, we're referring to consumable items. So you're not actually investing in something. When we say we invest in something, you need to invest in something that is going to accumulate, and it's going to grow in value, so that in the future it has the ability to return more money than you put into it.
Gotcha.
Compound growth is the eighth wonder of the world. And a lot of people don't understand the value of compound growth and the need to start setting money aside at an early age, because the cumulative effect of that compound growth over time is enormous. And I know we've covered it before on this podcast, and I've talked about it many times in meetings. But my dad had my brother and I do an exercise when we were younger, where he had my brother save $500 a month starting from the age of 20, and me saving $1,000 a month at the age of 30. And at the end of the exercise, my brother had accumulated more money because of the ability of compound growth. It didn't even matter that my money, I doubled the amount that I was saving over, a 25-year period. The exercise was until age 65. The fact that his was able to compound so significantly in the first 10 years that I was unable to catch up illustrated the point that you need to be setting money aside from an early age in order to achieve long-term, what a lot of people like to discuss as generational wealth. That's money that will transfer from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
And so just because you have a high income, it doesn't mean that you're wealthy, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to stop working when you want. And you want to be able to do things that are not required of you, but things that you want to do because they provide you with pleasure or satisfaction or some form of utility. And so you need to be able to set that money aside to replace your income, so that way you have the flexibility to pursue those endeavors when you are ready to.
In a nutshell, the wealth accumulation begins with a decision to save. So first you got to save. And once you start saving, then you have to invest prudently. And just going back to Alexander's earlier point about investing in sneakers, it reminded me of the government. Every time you hear the government talk about governing, they say, well, we're investing in the future of, and they go on and about what they're quote unquote investing in. What they're actually saying is we're spending your money and we're calling it an investment. There's actually no return on capital or no return on investment, but we're pretending as though we're being prudent and we're calling it an investment. And it's really just a waste of government or taxpayer expenditures.
Yeah. Well, by the way, guys, that happens on both sides of the border down here in the States. People are always saying we're investing in infrastructure. You're spending on infrastructure. You're not investing on infrastructure.
It's the oldest trick in the book amongst politicians. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who believe it. They nod their head. Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, that sounds good. I like that a lot. Well, let's talk about those investments because there is, I have been told, we have all been told, and if you doubt it, you can just run out there and Google it. One of the key things about investing is that you have to be a really diversified portfolio. You have to have that really super diversified portfolio. What's your take on that?
Well, yes, there has to be a certain amount of diversification, but there's two types of diversification that people get confused about. And the one type is, what does diversification mean exactly? When it comes to an investment portfolio, research clearly demonstrates that beyond 30 stocks, adding a 31st stock or 32nd stock reduces the rate of return more than it reduces risk. And so beyond holding 30 stocks, you are not getting an incremental benefit from diversification.
So hold on, Dad. Let's put it in somewhat relatable terms for people so that they understand what we're trying to say here. So I remember when I was in high school, you gave me the example of if I gave you a veal sandwich and you were really hungry, how satisfying would that veal sandwich be? I said it'd be.
I think I said hamburger, but anyway,
no, it was veal sandwich.
That's the Italian in you.
Yeah, it was a veal sandwich. I specifically remember this, and I said, "Oh, that sounds really good." And then you said, "Well, what if I gave you a second veal sandwich?" And I said, "That sounds really good too." And then you said, "Well, what about a third or a fourth or a fifth veal sandwich? Do you think each subsequent veal sandwich would provide you with the same level of satisfaction?" And finally, I started to say, being a teenager, the first two or three sounded great. And then after that, I realized, maybe after three, I'd probably be full. And I really wouldn't enjoy the fourth or the fifth one. And that's what we're trying to get at when we're talking about over-diversifying beyond 30 stocks is the incremental value that's being provided by that 31st stock in terms of its ability to reduce your risk relative to the performance that it's going to reduce. Because anytime you're adding more stocks to a portfolio, there's a finite number of great investments to choose from. The more you try and add to have more volume so you can reduce the risk, the more you're forced to choose from a increasingly mediocre pool of assets in terms of their current performance. And so what ends up happening is you end up sacrificing some performance for the sake of reducing volatility, which is what our industry classifies as risk. And we're going to touch upon that later. So just put a pin in that.
Well, then I want to turn to John for a second here because I want a definition of diversification because right now it sounds like diversification is number of stocks, and I know that's not what you mean, right? When I think of diversification, I think of something different.
What do you think about, Bill?
I think about diversification across sectors in a market.
Okay, and that's great. That's the job of the portfolio manager, which is what I do, is I diversify across sectors and across industries within sectors,
right,
and across companies within industries. And that's the job of the portfolio manager. Where the end user, the client, gets confused with diversification is these all-in-one portfolio solutions. So essentially, the investment industry about 25 years ago commoditized across both sides of our border. And so rather than leaving it to individuals or to their investment advisor to decide which investments to put money into, the institutional organizations came up with these all-in-one solutions. So now you have the XYZ, or for you Americans, XYZ balanced portfolio. And in it there's 60% allocation to stocks and 40% allocation to bonds. And then within the stock allocation, you have to decide geography. Is it going to be all in one geographic location like the U.S., or is it going to be globally diversified? And generally, On this side of the border, we globally diversified, but that doesn't mean we ignore the American market. It's the biggest chunk of the global diversification. But then you have a chunk for Europe, Asia, Canada, et cetera. And so what ends up happening is when you drill down through all those layers, you end up having exposure to 500 companies.
Oh, more.
Which is completely unnecessary. And the same on the bond side. So you really become excessively diversified, and that limits your rate of return potential. And that is excessive diversification. Now, here's where it gets even worse. Is you say, well, I have some money with ABC Bank Investment Advisory Firm. Why don't I add DEF and Bank Investment Advisory Firm so I don't have all my eggs in one basket? Well, that is just simply madness, because all you're doing is creating complexity for yourself, complexity while you're alive, complexity for your estate, and you are not actually reducing risk. You're actually reducing rate of return potential. You're actually creating duplication, because guess what? Every company is fishing from the same pond. So if they all have their rods in the same pond and the same school of fish, you're not really getting anything different. In your mind, you think, oh, I'm being prudent, but you're not being prudent. You're being emotionally irrational by wanting to have 1, 2, 3, 4 different investment firms, because we are so trained from a young age by our parents to be constantly in a state of fear. And then when we become old enough, when we become adults, then we are bombarded by the media, by authorities, fear, 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 be afraid of this, be afraid of that. And so we're constantly searching for ways to reduce risk without thinking about it effectively. And one of the other factors I like to talk about in terms of what stops people from succeeding financially is, in fact, fear. And we can, Alexander, we can get into that later.
We'll put a pin in that. So I want to piggyback off a couple of things that you said there. So part of the issue when you diversify across firms too is the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So you have whoever your relationship is with that at firm X and firm Y. They don't know what strategy you're using at the other firm. And at the same time, we have on both sides of the border, Canada and the United States, there are certain types of accounts. We call them registered accounts here in Canada. In the United States, it would be the equivalent of, your IRA and your Roth IRA. For us, it's the RSP and TFSA program, where they have limited amounts that you can contribute on an annual basis. And so in addition to having to navigate different strategies with those portfolios or those accounts, you then also have to account for how much you've contributed at all those institutions. So that way you don't over contribute at the other institution. And all you're doing is adding logistical complexity to your life and to the lives of the people who are trying to help you achieve your financial goals. The other issue is, people say, well, I want to protect myself in case something goes wrong. Well, in case something goes wrong, let's assume that they're talking about the financial institution that they're working with going insolvent. That's great, except that you're already covered by, in Canada, the Canadian, for the Canadian Investor Protection Fund. And what that does is you are protected up to $1 million per account. So if you have 2 accounts, you have $2 million of protection. The purpose of that pool or that fund or that insurance program, which is essentially what it is to protect you in the event that something like that happens. So you don't need to spread your money across 15 different institutions in order to protect against insolvency.
But on top of that, layer in the reality that every investment firm in North America is obligated to have a third-party custodian unrelated to the company that's managing the money. Mm-hmm. So in our case, our custodian is National Bank of Canada, or a division of National Bank of Canada. And there are custodians in the U.S. like Bank of New York Mellon. That's a huge custodian. And so the money is actually held with the custodians. So if the investment firm, in our case here, in our company here, IPC Securities Corp, if IPC Securities Corp were to become insolvent, the money is not lost. It's being held in custody at National Bank. So if someone is sitting with their assets at Bank DEF in Canada, and they say, well, I like the fact that I have Bank DEF, except Bank DEF has their money with their own third-party custodian. So insolvency of an investment dealer is not an issue in modern wealth management circles. Now, what if John gets hit by a bus? Well, that means the portfolio manager disappears temporarily until the replacement portfolio manager takes over. In our case, that would be Alexander. In the case of another institution, it would be whoever the institution chooses to succeed the chief portfolio manager. And every institution has multiple portfolio managers that are in the lineup that they could bring in, similar to a baseball team with pitchers in the bullpen.
Yeah.
Right? They're all competent pitchers. They all have a different specialty. But if necessary, you bring in the middle relief guy if the starter is out of the game in the third inning. And this is what happens in the investment industry. So really, there is no blatant, obvious need to worry about a portfolio manager being hit by a bus. There's no fear and no need to worry about the insolvency of a company. Your ultimate security is the companies that you own in the portfolio. And in our case, there's 30 companies. They're among the largest companies on the planet. And they're highly liquid, on the most liquid market on the planet. And so there is no need to be concerned about safety when it comes to investing with our firm or for most other companies.
So, good. Okay, that covers the diversification part of it. But also, when people talk about diversification, they talk about, well, you should also hold a certain amount of your portfolio in cash, which is always very confusing to me because it seems like there are times when you should have cash on the side and maybe the other times when you don't want to. What role does cash play in these myths?
In the world of financial planning, way back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth and when I began my career, the general guidance was you should have between 3 and 6 months worth of your expenses in the form of cash in the event that you lost your job.
Yeah.
And so that you could cover expenses for that length of time. And that's generally a good guideline. However, after that initial period, when we had the Industrial Revolution, lines of credit became available. And so today, the general guidance is 1 to 3 months in cash is good, and then a line of credit can cover you. And so the time to get a line of credit is not when you want to borrow money. The time to get a line of credit is when you have sufficient equity in your home that you can secure a line of credit with your home, create capacity, and don't run out and spend it all. But it's there. So in the event that you do lose your job and your 1 to 3 months of cash in the bank is depleted, you have a line of credit you can access until you can get your world restarted.
Yeah. And unfortunately, what we see too often is people who hoard cash because they feel it's some sort of security mechanism. But the reality of the situation is you're costing yourself money. You know, we have, and everybody's talked about inflation to death, and we've covered it ad nauseum on this podcast. But
yes,
you know, the inflation rate, let's call it, historically is 2%. Right now, it's hovering around 3%, depending on where you are and depending on what time you're looking at. Right now, we just saw the end of the Iran conflict, or it's approaching its end, and therefore we expect inflation. Yeah, we expect that fuel costs will come down, but the point of what I'm trying to illustrate here is you're losing purchasing power. So holding cash is not a 0% rate of return; it's a negative 2 to 4% rate of return, depending on what the inflation rate is. And so you need to understand that money needs to be working more productively in order for you to be able to accumulate wealth in the long term.
Let's elaborate a little bit on that point, because I am old enough to have seen how purchasing power devalues over time. So when I was a young guy graduating from university in the early 80s, $1 million then could buy you, in our geographic area, it could buy you 5 middle-class homes with $1 million.
Wow.
Today, $1 million will buy you 1.
Or part of one.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that. It depends on what you're talking about. That if you're talking about a detached home, a fully detached home, it's not.
That's just in a 42, 43 year time period. So, and who controls inflation? The government would have you believe that inflation is something that happens, comes out of left field. Look, we have inflation. Yeah, it's wow, we
it's
had
a mystery
storm.
force.
Yeah, it's a storm.
The meteorologist saw inflation on the horizon. It's coming. See the dark clouds.
Yeah. So inflation doesn't happen by accident. It's by design. Governments create the inflation. They create the inflation to inflate away borrowed money that they borrow to spend on quote unquote wars, whether they are real military conflicts like the war in Vietnam, the Second World War, or the war on COVID. In any case, whenever the government borrows excessively to spend to offset some calamity, they have to eventually pay it back. And because governments always spend more than they earn, they can't pay it back with savings. So they must deflate the expense away. And this is what we've seen in the last 6 years with the whole COVID fiasco. We've had an average inflation rate of 4 to 5% per year. If you have money sitting in the bank waiting for an emergency, you are systematically devaluating your capacity to pay for goods and services. Yeah. And this is why you should not be holding more than 1 to 3 months worth of expenses in interest-bearing investments. Interest-bearing investments will not keep up with inflation, and you don't know when the next inflation that the government plans to introduce comes, because only the government knows when it plans to deflate the currency in an excessive way. So this is why we invest in capital markets. We invest in businesses. We invest in real assets, because over time, real assets and businesses appreciate with the rate of inflation or more than the rate of inflation.
Yeah, because they're always going to increase their prices, which is their revenue stream, at a minimum to keep pace with inflation.
Well, so the funny thing is that, just to take a little flashback, John, I remember way back long ago, more years than I want to recall right now. I remember the earnest debate about what the proper rate of inflation could or should be. And that was coming off of, a fiery time of high inflation. At the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, so it was a while back. So we got 3 myths here. We've got confusing income with wealth. We've got over-diversification, and we've got the idea that cash is safe. So where else can we go with this?
So the next one that we see a lot, and this is one that I specifically added to our list here, was misclassifying risk. So people look at risk, and and it's not their fault. They've been hammered by the media, by the financial community, to think about risk as volatility. So they are told that you need to classify your risk as, how much you're willing to tolerate the movement in a stock's price. And the old adage, the common myth is you take 100, subtract your age, and that's the portion of your portfolio that should be invested in equities.
Oops.
And yeah. And then they also will tell you, well, the market's too risky. The prices fluctuate too much. That the volatility is of no consequence. Volatility is quite simply a dislocation between price and value, and it's temporary. What people need to understand, and what I always tell all of my clients whenever I meet with them, is historically a full market cycle, I'm talking from peak to trough to peak again, that is 3 to 5 years. That's, over the long-term history of the financial markets. If you look at it in the last 5 to 10 years, that's actually condensed down to about 1 to 2 years on the full market cycle. We had a full market cycle last year inside of 6 months, just to give you an example. But let's say, we're going to take historical precedent, and we'll say it's the 3 to 5 year period. So let's go on the long side. Let's say it's 5 years. So, Bill, what do you classify as a really bad market?
Well, that's not fair, because I've seen some really bad markets.
Okay, so let's start.
We want to hear what Bill has to say.
Well, hold on. So let's start first with, what's a correction? A correction is a drop of 10%.
Yeah, 10% or greater is generally accepted as a correction. Yeah.
Yeah, worse than 20%, we're into bear market territory.
Right.
So let's take an even worse. We're not just scraping the bottom of the bear market. Let's say we're in a deep bear market. Let's say we're down 30%.
Well,
Sound pretty bad?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think there's nobody that's going to go to tell you 30% down is a good thing. Okay.
Well, 30% down is between 20 and 30 is when clients really start to lose their shirts.
Yeah,
So let's use 30.
They're like a little bit worried about everything. Yes.
So at 30%, that means you still have 70% of your portfolio. Even if you are retired and not earning any money, are you likely to spend 70% of your portfolio in 5 years?
I'm going to say no, unless you have a very, very small portfolio.
No, for the vast majority of people, when I say the vast majority, I'm talking 99.99%. They're not spending 70% of their money inside 5 years.
Right.
They're not even spending it inside 3 years. And so the purpose of what I'm trying to illustrate here is to say to people that your money is going to recover. You're going to get back up to what that 100% value was within that 3 to 5 year period. And so that short-term dip that you had in the middle, that little meander that you took there, that detour, is really of no relevance. What really matters is having enough money, because you don't know how long you're going to live. We've talked about this before on the podcast. Your biggest risk is not volatility, it's longevity. If you live to 100, and the last 10 years of your life are extraordinarily expensive because you are suffering from declining or failing health, then you don't know how much you're going to need. And so you need to make sure that your foot is on the gas as much as possible, because you need to ensure that you have as much money as you possibly can to sustain yourself no matter what happens in your life. And if you don't use it, no problem. That is money that you are essentially acting as a caretaker for the next generation of your estate. And so they're not going to be upset at you because you accumulated more money. So all you're doing is trying to maximize your own well-being and also potentially maximize what goes to your family down the road.
Sure.
I want to elaborate on this. When I began my career, my first client was a 74-year-old retired successful businesswoman. And she brought up the subject of her age. And I said to her, "Is everyone who is 74 years old have the same financial profile as you do?" She said, "No." So why do we listen to this guidance that your age should determine how you invest? Warren Buffett, when he's now, I don't know, 94 years old.
94.
Did he divest his money and stick it into term deposits or what do you guys call CDs?
CDs? No. The answer is no.
No. The answer is no. Now, Berkshire Hathaway may have divested somebody on his last year before the Canadian guy took over. What's his name again?
Greg Abel.
Abel, yeah.
Yeah. Did you know that Greg Abel's uncle played hockey in the NHL?
No, Abel? I did not. No,
go.
That's great. Yeah. That's a good piece of trivia. Yeah, I like that.
Great Canadian hockey player's nephew is now managing Berkshire Hathaway. Just remember that, you Americans.
Clearly wasn't a Maple Leaf, though, right?
Anyway.
I play for Detroit.
Just having fun with you. Anyway, so getting back to it. So it doesn't matter what your age is. Your age does not determine how you invest money. Your financial profile should determine how you manage money.
Yeah.
And we're not saying to people that, you should, volatility is wonderful. That's not what we're saying. In our case, what's unique about our investment process is we actively adjust the portfolio to minimize volatility. So in the last 5 years, the maximum drawdown we've seen is no more than about 20%. Whereas typical portfolios that are 100% equities will have declined 30% during the same period, or 35%. So our process is one to mitigate declines, and that way people don't have to experience a lot of downside. But the truth is this: your risk as an investor at any age is not volatility, because if, let's say, there's a market crash and your portfolio drops by 30%, and you see it on your computer and you die of a heart attack, Okay, so how is that affecting you? Well, you're dead. It doesn't affect you. Now it's your beneficiaries. To your beneficiaries, it's found money. You think they're going to really they're going to get 70% of $2 million instead of 100% of 2 million. Think they're going to lose sleep over the fact they're getting 1.4 and instead of 2 million. They might lose 2 minutes of sleep, but after that they're going to get over very quickly because it's all found money. Okay, so really the risk is not the fact that the market drops when you're 75 years old. The risk is that you live to be 95. And then you have 20 years of inflation. And that's what your real risk is. And the purpose of holding an investment portfolio is to ensure that your capital exceeds inflation by a sufficient enough rate that your standard of living not only remains the same, but improves and is able to handle the demands on your capital that you might experience at an older age, as Alexander outlined earlier. Maybe it's medical care or to help other family members while you're alive.
Yeah. All right. Well, that does lead us to the question of taxes. And you know, there are a lot of people there are a lot of financial advisors who really use tax planning as a key driver in terms of retirement investment decisions. Where do you stand on taxes and the idea of tax planning should be number one in terms of that?
I'm going to get a quick comment in here because I know my dad's got a lot to say on this one. The number one, whenever you're going through your hierarchy of decision making,
yes,
the tax component of it is always second to the investment component. And my dad's going to get into why that is in just a moment here. But you know, one of the things that I see a lot of times is people will twist themselves into knots to avoid paying some taxes. So I have a particular client who I'm thinking about who is easily swayed by different schemes and opportunities, which will save him a little bit money on the tax side, but then tie up his money in ways that are not as productive as investing. And so, yeah, he's saved a little bit of tax, but he's paying 60 cents to save 5. You know what I mean? Like he's losing out on upside in order to save, 5 cents of tax. And it's not, at the end of the day, a very efficient way to allocate your money. Dad, you have a lot to say.
I have a couple of subjects to elaborate further on this. First of all, our portfolio has done really well the last couple of years, exceptionally well.
You have
historically well above average. Let's put it that way. And our clients have experienced some additional taxes in the course of
that prosperity,
in the course of filing in the course of realizing these gains, and a few of them, a small handful, complained that I've never paid this amount of tax in a long time. And I had warned them prior to tax filing. Right. Says, look, we've done really well. You're going to pay a bit more taxes than normal. And I said, look, you hire me to make money for you. You don't. I'm not in charge of the tax system. That's a political issue. So if you have an issue with the amount of taxes you pay on your profits, you need to speak to your politicians, or you need to vote differently. But that's not my area of specialization. Right. My job is to make more money. Now, here in Canada, despite taxes on capital gains, the majority of people are still keeping 75 to 80% of their capital gains. So it's not as though their wealth is being depleted with the additional gains.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing about taxes, and it really dovetails on Alexander's response, is to what magnitude people will go to avoid taxes that is irrational. So this whole thing about probate fees, and I'm not up on the probate fee issue in the United States, but here in Canada, when someone passes away and they have assets of a certain size, they have to have a court review the will and legitimize it. And that process is called probate. They've changed the name here recently, but everyone still calls it probate. So the cost of probate is 1.5%. People are losing their minds over paying 1.5%. In the course of employment, someone earning more than $80,000 in Canada is giving to the government on a marginal tax rate basis 40%. 40%. Okay, they're worried about 1.5% probate fee after they're dead. It doesn't matter. Okay, and so to what extent are they going to avoid this probate fee? Well, I'm going to add my adult kids onto the house value. Onto the house land title.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge mistake. And our legal department has explained that when you bring adult children on to home ownership, or for that matter, a bank account or an investment portfolio, what happens is you're creating a potential liability
for them,
those
right?
Those adult children, should they incur a legal liability from a creditor, or they're in an accident, they cause someone a financial loss and they're found guilty of having to pay for that financial loss, and they're on as a joint owner with you on your house or your investments or your bank account, guess what? The creditors can reach through that joint ownership and take your money. It is a massive legal liability and mistake to add adult children onto the ownership of real estate, your principal residence, or your investment portfolio. And I'm not talking about retirement accounts. Retirement accounts have designated beneficiaries.
Yeah.
So that's not an issue. But for non-registered assets, bringing on a joint owner who is an adult child is a big mistake. It also creates some potential estate execution issues. If you have 4 kids and one becomes joint owner for convenience because the other 3 are living scattered across the continent, and so for convenience they are acting on your behalf, then the question comes up, okay, if the parent dies in a joint ownership that goes to the adult child whose name is on the account, what about the other adult children? What rights do they have? And that creates complexity. We have legal cases here that have settled this issue, but it requires some documentation. So it is important that people not get their knickers in a knot over avoiding a 1.5% probate fee, because it is immaterial.
Well, everybody wants to avoid them, and people do some pretty irrational things.
If you want to avoid tax, move to a low tax jurisdiction like Texas or Florida, or leave taxes altogether and move to Cayman Islands or some other tax-free location if taxes are a big issue. But if you're living in North America, you're going to pay some taxes. It's a matter of how much, and so if it really bothers you, you need to be flexible.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind too is, as you mentioned, when it comes to, let's park the probate stuff aside for a second. Let's just talk about fees or taxes on your investment account in general. So in Canada, we have a 50% inclusion rate on your capital gains. So first of all, people have gains that accrue in their registered accounts, like their tax-free savings account, which are not taxable. And so the capital gains tax is not relevant or material in that case. And that's why you need to be prioritizing those accounts first and foremost. Mm-hmm. But then once we get into the non-registered accounts, where there is no tax shelters that are in place, it's only 50% of the gains that are taxable at your marginal tax rate. And so even if you're taxed at the highest marginal tax rate, which here in Canada is 54%, if you're living in Ontario, let's use round numbers here and say it's 50%. So if your marginal tax rate is 50%, but only 50% of the gains are included, really it's a 25% effective tax on your gains.
Yeah,
so you should still be trying to focus and allocate your money into investments that are capital gains bearing investments, because that is the most efficient way for you to grow your money and get it out on a net of tax basis. People want to avoid the tax, and that's all well and good, and I don't want to pay any more tax than I have to, but you got to have the big picture view here, and you got to understand we need to maximize your wealth. That means that money needs to grow. And we're going to try and grow as much of it as we can in the registered environment. Anything that is not eligible or is too large to fit within the registered environment is going to grow outside of that. And it's going to have a little bit of tax associated with it. But that's just the way it goes. And if you need that money, if you need to have extra money to pay the tax bill that you have, whoever you're working with, whether it's us or somebody else, they can liquidate a portion of your portfolio to cover that expense. So that way it's not coming to you or coming out of pocket for you.
Yeah. All right, that's 5 of the common mistakes. We've got 5 more to go. So I'm going to take a break here. And when we come back, we're going to get into one that I think a lot of people have a lot of thoughts about and a lot of opinions about, and that's real estate. So you will want to be around for that conversation, which will lead me to just tell you this right now. If you're not a subscriber already, that's your cue to hit the follow button. Become a subscriber so that you'll be notified when the next episode comes out, and you can continue this conversation with John and Alex, as a matter of fact. Until then, if somebody's listening to this, guys, and they want to talk to you, reach out to you, just can I have a discussion about what we're talking about? What's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
The best way for them to reach us is to send us an email at info@medwealth.ca. That's info@med-wealth.ca, or visit our website, which is medwealth.ca.
Good. And do that. I would encourage you to reach out to them. Just reaching out and having a conversation with John or Alex or anybody at MedWealth is not going to obligate you to do anything, and it might make a big difference for you, as a matter of fact. So until next time, I'm Bill Tucker. On behalf of John, Alex, and everybody at MedWealth Financial, thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. We will catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to Prescribing Prosperity. Visit our website at med-wealth.ca. That's med-wealth.ca for more information or to connect with us for a consultation. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the hosts and their guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of IPC Securities Corporation. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investment advice. Always seek the advice of a qualified and licensed financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment or retirement planning. MedWealth Financial Services can provide a private consultation to help you determine the suitability of any guidance discussed on the show.